Okay, so here we are with the Cenozoix Compressor by Three Bodies Technology and Plugin Alliance. This is a real treat, and when I saw that Three Bodies Technology had come out with a new plugin, I got excited because I am such a big fan of their Kirchhoff EQ. To me, that EQ is the best dynamic EQ out there. It's like got everything Pro Q3 has, plus so much more when it comes to the dynamic side of it. They really very much impressed me with the thought that had gone into it in terms of the tools. I'd always wanted the tools that you really need for fixing really hard problems that nothing else can fix. And there was just so much intelligence behind the development, the design of that plugin, that I thought it's got to be great if they've come up with a new one. And sure enough, it is amazing. So we're going to have a look at this. We're going to have a bit of a walkthrough of what it does, and then we can listen to some examples on voice and on drums. But before we get started, if you can like the video and subscribe, ring the bell and press the thanks button, that's really appreciated. Really helps the channel keep going. Okay, so let's start by having a look at what we've got. It's a compressor that's mini compressors. So if I click here, you can see each of these is a different model. They've modeled all the vintage compressor types that you'd want. And I have to say that the modeling is absolutely spot on, of the highest quality. They really sound great. I've got a lot of models of vintage compressors from all the top developers, and these sound every bit as good as the best ones in my view. They're fantastic, but there's so much more. So there's 24 different ones, and this bottom row are all modern compressor emulations, which I don't think they're modeled off specific compressors like the top row is. These are different types of compression that you can use, and for various different purposes, that are specifically designed for different purposes rather than modeled on a specific piece of gear. So super useful. So, but this is just the start. So there's so much more here. If I click on this one, for example, or maybe this is a better one, you can see how many controls we've got at our disposal here. Now, just before I look at these, the reason I clicked to a particular one is they don't all have all the controls available. Now, the reason being, if you take something like a vintage Opto, which is an LA2A model, it doesn't make sense to have some of these controls, attack and release, because the whole sound of the thing and the whole circuit, that's all automatic. And it's multi-stage, and all of that stuff is what gives this compressor its sound. So it really makes no sense to have those controls. And so each of these will have a different range of controls that make some sense for that circuit design and for what this compressor is good at. So yeah, before I get onto this, actually, I'm going to have a quick look at what we do have here for the emulation. So we've got Brit VCA, which is probably an SSL channel compressor. I think it probably is because it doesn't have an attack control on it, but does have a release. Then the Glue VCA, that's got to be the SSL bus. And it does have attack and release, as you'd expect. And then you've got the US VCA API, black VCA, that's going to be DBX, and then the red's going to be Focusrite. The dist VCA, I don't know what this is modeled on. It's very rich in harmonics. Not sure what hardware piece that's, but it is modeled on some hardware piece. If you have an idea, or you think, or you actually know, then let me know in the comments. That would be great. 21176, the black face and blue face. LA2A for the vintage Opto. Diode bridge again. I don't know which one this is. Chandler, I'm not sure. If anybody has an idea, let me know. Same thing with the Verymu. I'm not sure which one that is. It seems to be more after a specific one. And then we've got the vintage tube. Same thing. I'm not sure exactly which one that is, but they all sound amazingly great. And And if we think about just like, for example, the 1176s, to my ears, these sound every bit as good as, I mean, I've got lots of emulations of these, and I've used lots of real hardware versions, and this sounds every bit as good as any emulation out there to my ears. And I'm not going to compare these to any other emulations or anything else. I'm sure maybe some people will, and that might be interesting, but my feeling about the comparisons is, I mean, I've got a friend up the road who has a studio with two blackface 1176s in them, and they both sound really different from each other. They both sound like 1176s blackface, but they don't sound the same. And I've worked in loads of other studios that have had 1176s. They all sound different from each other. So comparing things like that, you know, to me, it's not important for me. What's important to me is if it's in that area, if you have an emulation that sounds like 1176, somewhere in between all the different ones you've heard, that's all I care about. And then the question is, does it sound really great? And if it sounds really great, then, you know, then I'm interested. And this one really does. All of these do. And if you look in Plugin Doctor, the harmonics that are created are very complex for each of these and very different for each of them, which is what I would expect to see. And a lot of times when I see emulations and I look at the harmonic content, it's pretty simple looking, and I'm thinking, is the hardware really that simple? And, you know, maybe it is, but when you look at these, they're really complex. And the sound is very rich and very nice and sounds very hardware-like to me. And I'm guessing it's because they've modeled the harmonics very closely. But what's even more impressive to me is that when you start changing the controls, the attack, not just the attack and release as you'd expect to change the harmonic content, but some of the other controls too, they change the pattern of harmonics significantly as you move them, as you would expect to happen in a real hardware. And many times, if you look in Plugin Doctor with an emulation, when you change the controls, all that happens is the harmonics go up and down a bit in level, or you get a very minor change at best. Whereas you really expect in hardware to see like significant changes, and that's exactly what you do see here. And I'm guessing that you're going to get those changes happening in the time domain as well, like depending on, you know, dynamically changing depending on the input signal that comes into them, as you would with hardware. And I think that's got a lot to do with why these sound so great. So and it's not to say that these, just to finish off here, that's not to say that these non-hardware emulations down here don't have harmonic content. They do. Each one a unique one, and some of them are very clean and hardly have any, and some have a fair amount, but they're just different and they're designed for specific purposes. So now onto the controls we have. I'm going to go back over to here, so we've got all of the controls showing. Actually, yeah, no, they're all showing. So starting on the left here, we've got peak and RMS. Now there are other compressors out there that have this. Many of them don't, and it's great to have the detection circuit. You know, you can choose to go all the way over to peak, so it's just detecting peaks, all the way over to RMS or anywhere in between. That is fantastic. Feedback and feed forward. Now, this is, I can't think of another compressor that has a variable control for this. There might be one out there somewhere, but this is very rare at best, and it's really amazing to have this, so that you can apply it to different models that, you know, might have a switch, you know, in the case of an API between feedback and feed forward, but here you can vary anywhere in between the two for, you know, different models. And I don't know if it's available on every model, but it's available on every model where it's applicable. So if you look here, you can see that as I change this, you're getting a change in the knee characteristic. And that's the kind of detail and the kind of emulation level that really is, you know, very characteristic of this plugin throughout. It's really detailed and really thought through and really deep. So we also have a knee control here. So the knee, just in case you don't know how knees work, this line here represents, and not everybody finds these transfer curves, as they're called, an easy way to understand compression. I used to find these really hard to understand. I now get how they work, but I didn't find them very intuitive for a long time. But basically the way it works is this 45-degree line here represents no compression. And as the angle changes, they become more horizontal, it's more and more compression. And completely horizontal would be limiting. So as I change the knee here, you can see how it rounds off. And you can see what that actually means. It means that below the threshold, you're getting some compression happening. And it increases the ratio, basically. And by the time you get all the way here, you've got the full ratio happening. But as you're down here, you know, it's less and less ratio. The ratio is kind of being turned down, as it were, gradually increases. And that's what a soft knee is here. And that's reflected also here on the threshold control. To the right here, you have a display which shows you where the threshold is, how you are moving through that threshold with the ratio. So that's, again, really useful. So you've got your knee control here, but you've also got the fact that this feedback is either changing your ratio or changing the shape of the knee, depending on whether you've got some knee going on there. So yeah, really great detailed work here. But the real important thing is that you've got this feedback, feed-forward control. Now this is harmonics. I'm not 100% clear how this works. Reading the manual, I have asked the developers. I haven't heard back yet because I wanted to get this out fairly soon, and I've only just asked. They're usually like really good at getting back, so I'm sure I will find out, and I can always kind of post that in a comment later if it's of interest when I hear. I wasn't 100% clear from the manual whether all the way over here you get the natural harmonics of each different model, and as you turn this up, it just adds more even harmonics into that set of modeled harmonics, or whether, you know, at this 50% point, that is, because often, you know, harmonics of a compressor are going to be a mixture of odd and even. And as you turn this to the right, it adds more even harmonics. So I'm not sure whether at 50% that is the kind of the modeled harmonics, and you can then kind of decrease the even and increase them, or whether the modeled harmonics starts at this point. I'm not 100% sure on that one. But what this does do, what I can be sure of, is that as you turn this up, it adds more even harmonics. So that's really great, because if you've got a sound that you like, but you want to just get it a little bit more of that even harmonic sound, which to my ears is a little bit more kind of smoother and creamier sounding, you can move it that way if it feels like it needs that. And it might not. It might need none of that. So great to have that extra harmonic control. Input gain. That's pretty obvious, and it's there because some of the models, like, you know, the 1176 and LA two-way, don't have a threshold control, and you get the threshold by driving the input gain, so you can use that. I did notice that when I drove the input gain up and compensated down with the threshold, I did get a difference in harmonic content than if I had the input gain down and had the threshold up. So that's interesting. Ratio, obviously straightforward, goes all the way up to 100 to 1, limiting, and down to very low, so fantastic range there. The knee setting we've been over. The range setting, this is something that is so often missing in compressors. There are compressors out there that have this, obviously, but it's so welcome when I get in a compressor. I wish all of them had this, because it's just so useful to set a level of how far it can go before, you know, it's maximum. It hits its maximum, because without this, you can set your compression up so that it's sounding really great, and then you get the odd really loud note or something, and it squashes the hell out of it and kind of ruins the sound. And this just avoids that. It means you can, you know, set it to maximum it's ever going to hit here, and you can set your controls freely, exactly get just the sound you want to craft, just the tone you want, and not worry about the fact that that perfect tone might result in the occasional completely crushed note. Also really useful if you're trying to really surgically fix a problem, being able to control that range is super useful. Also for mastering, incredibly useful, I find, to be able to have a range there. Kind of essential in my view in to have that at least at your disposal, even if you don't use it all the time. So moving over to the attack and release section. So this is one of the most powerful and fully expanded area of this plugin, and it brings some really new ideas to the table that I am finding just super useful. So let's start with the attack. You've got an attack control, which varies depending on the model, as you'd expect. But you've also got these really great new controls that I've not seen on anything else. So say you set your attack up to a certain amount so that you've got the sound you want. Say you're working on a vocal or any instrument, and if you have the attack too fast, it's going to sound too squashed. The overall envelope's not going to be right, especially if you're working with an emulation or something that has a unique kind of envelope to it, and that's what you're after, is the envelope that you get when you have the attack sort of up here somewhere. Sounding great, but the odd transient is just popping through in a mix. I mean, how often does that happen? It happens often, and so you're stuck with this choice of either making the attack faster than you really want it to be, just to catch those, and you kind of spoil the sound a bit, or adding a second compressor to grab those transients that inevitably ends up changing the sound in other ways too, because it's not just going to grab those transients. And you can use a transient designer and so forth, but it's a second plug-in, and you've got to tune it all in just right and all of that sort of thing. So this basically, and it's not the same as what this does. Well, it is, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to start with the clamp control. This is unique as far as I can tell. It's like, I can't think of any other compressor that has this. So within the range of the attack you have, say you set it at 30 millisecond attack, within that range, this adds a second compressor that just grabs that section and clamps it more. So it doesn't clamp the entire signal. It only clamps the attack proportion that you're letting through. So you set your attack so that everything's sounding great, but if the transients aren't quite as you need them to be, but you don't like the sound of clamping it too early, then you can just bring a second compressor in that's not going to do anything to your sound apart from work on the area of the attack that you're letting through here. That is amazing. That I've never seen that before. It solves a problem that so commonly have, where you can now get your ultimate sound and also deal with the attack separately and the transient separately. And then you have here, which basically you've got a built-in transient designer here in addition to that is just dealing with the very short transients. So if everything's sounding good, but you're just getting the odd short transient come through with a percussion or something like that, you don't want to squash it all, you just want to grab those, you've got basically a mini little transient designer here for the attacks. Just amazing. I mean, how useful is this? It's fantastic. But it doesn't stop there. I'm going to skip the punch pump control for a moment and go over to the release section here, which is just amazing. It's got auto release, which is great to have. It's got a release control, as you'd expect. But it's also got two other controls here. And what this sensitive control is it's like a dual release. So we all know that a lot of vintage hardware is so sought after, the sound so sought after, because it has a two-stage release, or sometimes more than two-stage release, where the transients have their own release time, which is going to be faster, and the non-transient material has a slower release time. And that gives you a much more transparent, natural sound to have that two-stage release. And this allows you to have that on all the other, or many of the other compressor models, on all of them, unless they've got their own signature hardware two-stage release. On anyone that doesn't have that, it allows you to control it. So the more I turn this up, the more there's going to be a difference between the transient response, the transient envelope, and this non-transient material. And as I turn it down here, it's just release this one release time on everything. But here it increases more and more the difference between the two release times. So that is amazing to have. And when you have this up, you can see this little blue line here moving. What that is, it's like a kind of a meter showing you how the release time, and it moves in real time as the music's playing, and it shows you how the release time is changing in real time in response to transient and non-transient material. And up here, this shows you how the release time is changing numerically in real time, as opposed to the overall release time that you've set here. So it's changing like in comparison to that, or in relation to that. Unbelievably useful and great on every level, that. And here you've got this tight control. This is great. What this does is it's just for the bass. So it just changes the attack and release time. So this is for attack and release for the bass frequencies. And as you turn it up, it tightens the bass frequencies, meaning that it's going to have an attack and release that's faster on the bass frequencies. But you're also going to get more saturation, because as it gets faster and faster, it starts kind of actually reacting with the waveform, moving with the waveform of the actual lower frequency. So that creates a kind of wave shaping distortion, which can sound really great on a lot of music, but isn't going to sound as natural as, say, it's going to work for something like acoustic sounding, or that you want to sound natural. So you can leave it here, or you can actually bring this the other way and slow up the attack and release times on lower frequency material, which is going to mean that there's no distortion happening. But obviously you're going to get a more relaxed, less tight sounding low end. But for some material, that's going to be exactly what you need. So I've never seen this on another compressor. It's so useful and just amazing. And finally, in this timing section, we're going to look at this punch and pump. And this is such a powerful control, as we'll look at when we actually listen to some of the examples. So punch and pump just give you kind of a rough idea. It does so much more than that. It really depends on the source. Basically, the idea is that as you turn this up, you're going to get more transient emphasis, and as you turn it down, you're going to get a different envelope. It can start really pumping, especially when you bring it all the way down, but it depends on the material. It doesn't always do that. Sometimes it can be really great for pulling a really smacky sound out of, say, a snare or another drum. So it's basically, what I find with this is I will dial in the sound I want, start with the basic emulation or modern one that I want, get the sound so it's sounding like really great, just how I want it, and then I mess with this, and I think I've got the sound as good as it can get, and I'm really happy with it. And then this can sometimes realize that I can get another 10% of greatness out of it by just moving this a little bit. So yeah, it's fantastic. Moving over to here, makeup, wet, dry, very straightforward. You can move this up and down by dragging anywhere along here. If you move your mouse wheel around, you can change the ratio. That's quite useful. We'll see the display. It's got a really nice dual display for seeing what's happening with the compression, or three-way display for what's happening with the compression, which is super useful and kind of what we've come to expect with modern compressors. Down here we've got, you can make that go away, but the big thing here is you've got a sidechain. If we switch that on here, we've got a full sidechain capability here, including we've got MS and a whole bunch of MS and mid-side and stereo options here. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but basically you've got mid-side plus some other great options. Amazing, fantastic. Left-right linking, MS linking, from mid-side linking, fully variable, amazing. And then of course you've got EQ here. And you've got your full list here of all the Kirchhoff shapes. And yeah, it really is. And you know, you got your hold down Option, you've got your Q. I mean, you've really got everything you could ever want and need for a sidechain shaping here. So amazing, fantastic, but it's still more. We've got oversampling. Now what they say is without oversampling, it's still very free of aliasing. I haven't put this through like a full aliasing test or something, but on Plugin Doctor, I am not seeing any aliasing happening and nothing obvious. But if you're worried about it, you've got oversampling up to 16 times here. So, and they've got a new type of oversampling, which is even more effective than the traditional kind and has less CPU overhead. So amazing, more innovations, great stuff. But there's still a couple of other really amazing things here. Presets here, by the way. And that is that it's got hold. Now this can be so useful and is so often omitted from compressors, even like modern ones, allowing you to hold before the release phase happens. And that can be so useful in certain situations. Great in sound design, but also just very useful sometimes to just be able to hold that before it happens, to control the envelope really closely. And again, it's a bit like a situation here where you've got your perfect sound, but you just need to be able to hone in on one bit of it without messing with the rest of it. That's kind of why this is so useful. And then finally, we've got look ahead, which is something that's always so welcome in a compressor, especially a modern compressor, which allows you to, but yeah, any compressor really allows you to grab those transients that nothing else is quite grabbing. You know, if transients are escaping through, you know, you can use this and it clamps even before the transient happens. So really useful and very welcome. So yeah, what could you possibly ask for more for in a compressor? I can't possibly imagine in my mind what I could ask for more. But the real important thing is the sound, which we're going to now have a listen to. So I'm going to start by playing the vocal soloed without anything on it, so you can hear what it's like, and then we'll start listening to some of the sounds that this compressor can do on a vocal.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Now you've noticed I put a bit of, I've left the reverb on there, and for me I find that important. Oftentimes I find people, when they're soloing a vocal, they take everything off of it. I mean, fair enough if you're demonstrating like delay and reverbs, but even when EQ and compression's being demonstrated, I always find it really hard to listen to vocals with absolutely dry anyway, but plus the fact that to me, it never sounds real. Like it's not how it's ever going to sound, if you see what I mean. So I much prefer to have a bit of reverb on there just because it sounds more natural and it makes it easier for me to understand in context what the EQ or compressor is actually going to sound like. So that's why I've put some on there, just so you understand, because I know a lot of people don't do that, but I think it's a good approach. So let's now start with some presets that I've made, showing off some of the different models. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to just bring it in and let you hear this, and then I'll bring it out in a bit so you can hear the comparison.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning.
So that is a great sounding compressor. It's really smooth, really holding the vocals in a nice natural way. You can see there's a good deal of compression going on here, but it's not sounding squashed. It's sounding natural. It's sounding really nice texture coming out of the vocals. So yeah, to me, that is like first class compression sound. That's a very moo sound. Let's move on now to an Opto LA2A model and have a listen to this.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
All I can say about that is wow, that sounds fantastic. I think that's my favorite ever LA2A emulation that I've heard. It just sounds so creamy and musically nice. I hate to use the word musical because people use that to mean almost anything, but it's just such a sweet, luscious, rich sound to the vocals. Yeah, beautiful sounding, I guess is what I would say about that. Let's move on to the next one. So this is the diode bridge one. Let's have a listen to this one.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
So really nice saturation on that. It really kind of, the breathy texture is really, a nice, really nice texture on that. Nice, rich saturation sound. Let's move on to this one, which is a Focusrite sound. And with all of these, I have adjusted the controls to sound what I thought was nice. Okay.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Very nice VCA sound. Let's go to FET here. So this is a Blue Face. Let's have a listen to this.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Really nice sounding 1176 emulation. Sounds fantastic. I wouldn't use that on this vocal, but it sounds really, really like a great emulation. Let's go for a Tube.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Really nice. Again, with all of these, I'm pushing this quite hard, as I normally do push things. When I'm demonstrating things, I usually push things further than I would do. I might compress the vocal this much, but I'm really just pushing it pretty hard so you can really hear the character of what's going on and the differences. Okay, do one more. This is the Brit VCA, which is probably SSL channel.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Good, sounds really good. Finally, let's let's move over. I'm going to just go over to their actual vocal modern one and mess with that a bit.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all.
Sounds really nice and smooth. Let's now go for listening in context before we move on to drums and just hear how this sounds with the rest of the music. I'm going to start with it out so you can hear it without, and then I'm going to bring in some of these compressor patches so you can hear what it's like. Presets, I mean.
If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If only they could call in the wee small hours of the morning. That's the time you miss them most of all. If
I think that's enough. I mean, just those two sound so great. That would sell it to me on its own. So, I mean, right away you can hear that without it, the vocal sounds good, but the quieter bits, like that last note that she sings, get pretty well lost. And other bits kind of jump out. So you need some compression there. And with both of those models, we did the Mu and the Opto. It really holds the vocals while sounding natural. It doesn't sound heavily compressed, even though it is pretty heavily compressed. And it brings the tone out, you know, that nice silky tone comes to the forefront. And that's the other thing without the compressor is she's got a beautiful tone to her voice, but with all those other instruments going on, the brass and all the rest of it, those tonal subtleties can get kind of lost in the music. Whereas with a bit of compression, of this quality of compression, those tonal elements come up to the forefront and you can really kind of hear them even with all that stuff going on. And finally, that last note, which was getting lost, is now like very easy to hear, sustaining right to the end. So yeah, sounds fantastic. So let's now move on to drums. Okay, so we're going to start with snare and then we'll do drum bus. So I'm going to start with the Cenozoix bypassed, so you could just hear the snare without any compression on it. And then I'll bring this in and we can try some different presets and algorithms and so forth. Okay, so without first. So you can hear it's okay snare sound, but to me, it doesn't have a lot of body to it. It's a bit of a kind of gunshot sound, I guess you could say, and it doesn't have a lot of body, and the attack to me is a little kind of fizzly, you know, it's a bit rough sounding. It's not like really punchy and concise. So that's kind of what I'd be looking for. So let's have a listen to some of these presets that I've made. So this is, let's start with this one here. This is based on one of the modern algorithms they've got. Let's have a listen to this. So the attack is really tightened up a lot more. It's got more punch and more weight to it. Let's try another one. So this one is based on the bus. So a really nice smack to it, and also some more weight. Let's try this one. This is back to the drum with a slightly different setting. So up until now, all of those ones were all the modern, based on the modern ones, just so you can have a bit of a hear of what those sound like. So let's go through and have a play with some of the emulations, hardware emulations. And what's amazing here, I find, is, you know, you start realizing when you're using this, just how amazing it is to be able to just flip through different emulations with the same settings. So you set up, you know, the amount of threshold and ratio and all of that the way you want it, and then you can just move through them. It's just fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to start doing that. So massive range of sounds there. It's just like, how could you ever want for more when it comes to a snare sound? The control that you can get over a snare sound with a compressor. It's like anything imaginable is at your fingertips here. Okay, so with the drum bus, I'm going to first back off on the snare compression because I was pushing it very hard for demonstration purposes, and I want to make it less compressed so that you can hear more clearly what the drum bus compressor is going to do to the snare along with everything else. So I've backed off on that. So let's have a listen to the drums now without the bus compressor. Then I'm going to bring it in. It's on the drum algorithm at the moment. I'll mess around with that a bit, and then we'll move to some of the other algorithms so you can get an idea. So starting without, and then I'll bring it in. the variation there is, yeah, it's off the charts, really. You've got so much there for anything. I mean, you've just obviously been listening to the drum bus there, and there's a full range of flavors a full palette of flavors that I would want to have at my fingertips in a kind of idealized world. And the funny thing is, we now have this sitting in front of us in this plugin. Yeah, fantastic plugin, and I can't praise it enough, really, for what they've managed to achieve with this. Just the quality of the sounds, from the beautiful sounds on those vocals, where it was right up there with the best vocal compressors that I've heard, to, you know, honing in on just this kind of smackiness or body that you want to bring out of a snare, to drum bus, to anything you throw at this thing, you're going to get great results. And there's just so much to choose from. So, yeah, can't praise this high enough. Huge congratulations to Three Body Technology for, yeah, knocking it out of the park again, and really pushing the envelope forward beyond anything that's been out there before. It's what I really like to see out of a plugin company, is when they can really do something extending beyond what we've already got, making our job easier as mix and mastering engineers. This is the kind of tool I like to see. So yeah, big thumbs up from me on this one. I think it's a fantastic piece of work. And not only does it sound great to me, it sounds as good as any of the other emulations out there. So a huge thumbs up to this one, and I hope you found this useful. If you did, please do give the video a like, ring the bell, subscribe, it's really helpful, and of course pressing the thanks button to support the channel also really helps it all keep going, and is really appreciated, and hope to see you next time.